What it do, guys? It's D'Anthony here, man, aka Hood Scout, back again for another edition of the Hood Scout podcast. And this is really a unique podcast, a podcast like no other. We're going to have athletes, we're going to have coaches, we're going to have intellectuals, we're going to have media members of all sorts. And don't forget, guys, to like this podcast, share this podcast, and help grow this podcast. This is not just my podcast. This is also your podcast. And the only reason it's going to grow is because you guys are going to be invested in it, guys. Sit back, get your beverage of choice ready, get your popcorn ready, get your dinner ready, get your steak ready, get your vegan meal ready. Tune in, guys. Hood Scout. Peace. Hey, what it do, guys? Welcome back to another edition of the Hood Scout podcast. Today I got a really good guy. Guy that's really great in his profession. And without further ado, Mike, tell the people who you are and where you from.
I'm from Irving, Texas. My name is Mike Roach, and I cover recruiting for Horns 24/7 and the 24/7 Sports Network. And so I grew up in the Dallas area, and being able to do a job that I absolutely love is, it's kind of a dream come true for me.
So, Mike, talk a little bit about where you grew up and what was your introduction into sports? Kind of a very interesting job. You're one of the best at what you do, but what was that introduction into that to this profession, if you will?
Well, I grew up like most kids do in the state of Texas, loving high school football. And, even when I was a kid and we didn't know anybody on the team, my dad would take me to Irving High football games on Friday nights. And, we would go to Texas Stadium in the fall during playoffs and watch, 3 or 4 games a day. And it's a really big tradition between me and my dad. And I really just fell in love with high school football in general at that point in time. And so, always had an interest in writing, always wrote throughout high school and, took journalism classes and things of that nature. And, I was working a job that I absolutely hated and told my wife, I love to write. And she said, well, why don't you just start writing again? Like she never knew it about me because I had just stopped doing it. And she was like, you can write whenever you want. You don't have to be hired by somebody to write something. You can start your own blog or you can just, do whatever you want. So I started writing again. And, I've always kind of followed recruiting probably since about 2004, 2005, just because it's a way to stay tapped in with high school football. And I've always been extremely interested in the player acquisition side of things, whether it be the NFL draft or, recruiting. How do these players how do you build a roster? That's like a really interesting thing to me. So, it got to the point where I kind of combined those two things together and, got picked up by an independent site, Horn Sports, where a lot of guys in our market have gotten their start. And, Aaron Carrera over there is the guy that owns it, is incredible. Did everything he could to help me get to where I am now. I mean, he's always the first person I think whenever I have any sort of professional achievement, because he basically like let me do whatever I wanted. I was writing some Texas like team stuff and I just said, hey, I want to do recruiting. Like I want to cover this. And he said, go do whatever you want. And I kind of built my own name there. And then, moved on to 24/7 where I worked with EJ Holland and then kind of took his spot when he moved on. So it was kind of a lot of hard work went into it, but very fortunate to meet the people I did and get kind of the connections I did to get me there. I told somebody, people always ask me like, how did you get into this line of work? And my thing was literally like, I just want to get paid to watch high school football. That's all I want to do. This is the way I figured out I could best do it.
Let me ask you this, Mike. You said something very interesting at the beginning. How instrumental was the support of your wife in this journey? Because on the outside looking in, when you just get started, I don't know how the money thing is. Would you say that she was very instrumental in you even getting into this field? Obviously she was, but from a standpoint of support.
There is no way I would be here if it wasn't for her. Not only was she the person who, kind of influenced me to get back into it. There were times where I was traveling we were paying for the money. I was going out of state. I was going out of town to go see camps or games or stuff like that. We didn't have a ton of money when we first started out. We were both working, not minimum wage jobs, but we were both working like not the greatest income. And we were newly married, and I was spending a ton of weeks away from her. So like I would work overtime during the week to kind of pay for my football stuff. And on the weekends, she wouldn't see me. So she sacrificed a lot. I always say, like, in a marriage, kind of for one person to rise, the other person has to fall back. And that's just kind of how it works. And she did that. I mean, she put everything there first. It's kind of, I equate it to like a coach's wife. If you talk to coaches, their wives are incredibly instrumental, because the hours we spend doing this job, if you don't have that support at home, I've seen this business eat marriages alive. And that's obviously something I don't want. So yeah, I mean, without her, there would be no me in this business. And, I try to tell people that at every stop, and try to make sure that she gets the recognition she deserves, because she definitely sacrifices a lot so I can do what I want to do.
That's very powerful. That's very powerful. And I've heard you talk about it, so that's kind of led me to that question. So walk me through that first introduction where you was able to go to different schools, and how was that experience when you first got your hands dirty?
It was something like I remember when I first started doing this, I would work my regular job during the week, and then I would obviously go to games on Thursdays and Friday nights. And I would go, man, I wish I had the time to like just go spend time at schools and get to know coaches and get to know players. And I didn't, I would show up at the games, I kind of get to know coaches a little bit, but once I kind of got into it, my goal was to connect with the high school coaches. I mean, that was kind of the first step. And so that's why I still to this day, I go to a lot of like coaches clinics. I go to coaching school every year in the summer. And I constantly getting in front of high school coaches so that they know who I am. They know what I'm there to do. And they know that, because I do think our business has a stigma of like, that where some people don't know what we do, or they don't fully understand it, so they don't trust it. I remember the first spring I was doing the job, I showed up to a school in Houston, and I had tried to contact this coach a million times, couldn't get him. Called the recruit who I was going to see's mom and said, hey, I'm trying to go see your son, but I can't get in touch with anybody there. And she basically said, like, go to the field. I'll call the principal. He'll meet you there. But before the principal got there, I walked onto the field, and the coach was basically like accusing me of being like a street agent and trying to like peddle his kids. And I was just like, no, man, like, I just want to take a couple pictures of him, talk to him for like 5 minutes and leave. That's all I'm going to do. So yeah, it's kind of an educational thing for me. Is like, I educate coaches on what we do. And, I try to work closely with them, because in this state, straight line recruiting is such a big priority for those coaches. They want it to go through them and not third parties. And so, I just kind of tell them, hey, here's the way recruiting works nowadays. And if you want it to go through you, then you've got to make sure your kids are getting the most exposure possible, or else they're going to go to whoever's going to give them the most exposure possible. And so, I try to be open. I like kind of have a personal policy of like, if any coach anywhere invites me to their school, I will try to make time and go, because I don't ever, I want to be as open, and I want to be connected. Now, obviously it's tough to fit everybody in all the time, but like, I did 3 visits this spring that I basically owed from like 2 years ago, where coaches were inviting me out, and I finally said, okay, I got some time. I'm going to come see you, even though they don't necessarily have Texas guys or guys that Texas would recruit. I want to be able to get around and meet as many of those guys as possible. So, just getting out there and getting to know the kids. I think, a big part of my success in the business has been, I go to everything. There's no magic to what I do. I'm everywhere. I try to be as everywhere as I can, so the kids know who I am. They know my face. They're comfortable with me, and the coaches as well, and the parents. So I think that's like been the biggest thing for me, is just kind of the work ethic. There's people who do this job 2 ways. They do it like I do, or they sit on their couch and DM and make phone calls. And for me, I don't think you can be as successful doing it that way. And it's not as fun doing it that way.
Let me ask you this, Mike. Now, you've been around a lot of how many? Let me ask you. Let me before I ask this question. How many like schools have you been to in this state? And then what's the area that you covered as far as the geography wise of it?
I mean, my role, I cover basically the entire state. Now I can't give you an exact number. I don't. I wouldn't even know where to begin on exact number. I mean, I visited most of the high schools in DFW. I could tell you that. I visited a lot of them in Houston. I visited a lot of them in East Texas. Um, Austin, I've got, 7 or 8 that I've been to. San Antonio, a few. Haven't been out west as much, but hit Lubbock last year. So I try to cover it all, and I tell like the guys that work for me that come up with me. Nick Harris, who worked for me prior and now is Rivals, and Hudson Stanch, who works with me now, is we work our area like a recruiter would. So when spring comes around, even like January, as soon as like state's over, I take a couple weeks to kind of refresh myself, and then it's back to the grind of going out to schools. And when I go to schools, I work my area. I show up at schools in Dallas all the time that like, hey, I know you don't have anybody for Texas, but I'm just here to see your kids. And one day those people are going to have somebody recruited by Texas. Prime example, I live in Crowley. Right. I had a great relationship with Courtney Allen, who was the head coach at North Crowley. And he kept saying, hey, please come, please come. And I would show up for months and months. And, early on, he told me I got this young linebacker named Samaje Burrell that I think is going to be a player. And I watched Samaje grow up. And then all of a sudden, boom, Texas offers Samaje. And I don't have to do anything. I just show up like I normally do. And Samaje goes, oh, there's Mike. And he covers Texas, and I've known him for a long time because he's been showing up here. And so, yeah, I work my area like a recruiter would, where, we stop by, we check in, we just be seen. That's like the biggest thing is just to, be seen and get out there and really go evaluate all the kids. I think there's a perception when I show up that's like, well, we don't have any kids for Texas. And it's like, well, that's fine. But like, that is the major part of my job. But also when I have time, I do like seeing kids. I have a network of college coaches I deal with, be it from all the way up to Power 5 at schools in the like big time schools in the SEC, all the way down to D2 and D3. So like, if you got a prospect anywhere in between, I can make some calls and get them looked at. So that's kind of the big thing for me. I don't know if I could give you like a number, man. I don't even know where to start. I'd have to sit down. That might be a fun project one day to sit down and plot out every school I've been to.
Yeah, that's all good, man. You just say a lot of them. Let me ask you this on a football tip. Have you noticed any difference between the winning programs and the programs that haven't been that good? Because you've been around, whether it be weight training, whether it be the athletes. What have you noticed about the great programs versus the programs that are, kind of trying to do something? I'll put it like that.
I think it's just, I don't know how to put this. I guess I would say it's kind of just a general air of like organization when you're somewhere, right? Like, for instance, I've been around DISD a lot, and some schools range from extremely organized and detailed in the way they do things, and some are just, hey, we're kind of like don't have a lot of clue what we're doing here. I knew, I've been coming around like South Oak Cliff for 3 or 4 years. So I saw their progression to what they were this year. They went from okay, we're pretty together to, okay, now we're taking the next step to this is being run like a championship program. You could see it each offseason. I remember being there. I laughed at this year's spring game because it was such a media circus. There were 900 media guys out there. And I said, I was talking to, I believe, a former guest of your show here, Kyle Ward. And I said, yeah, I think I was it was me and one other guy out here last year. We were the only two. And they were talking then about a state championship. And I watched the way they operated their spring game, and I had watched the way they operated their offseason program. And I was the one early on that was like, hey, I think Sock can make a run at this because I was just so familiar with them. I had seen them. A lot of those guys are good friends of mine, and the kids are easy to root for. I've known them forever. So, yeah, I think it's just a general like organization of everything. They like Sock seemed to have a plan, and that plan developed every year. And like going into last year, it was like, okay, this is like a fully optimized plan now to where these kids understand what's expected of them. The bell rings, they come down. They don't have to ask, what are we doing today? They're right into the weight room. They know what they're lifting, and then they're right out onto the field and they're working. I mean, they kind of got it running like a fine-tuned machine.
Good stuff. Good stuff. Now back to the 247 side of it. To me, Mike, you're one of probably the best writers in this profession. I remember I had my subscription with you guys, so I would go on 247 LSU or 247 OU, this, that, and the other. How do you format your stories, Mike? I mean, because to me, you're covering a lot of ground. I can sure sometimes your mind can be everywhere. How do you formulate your stories and kind of frame it right for you?
I appreciate that. I'm like I tell people all the time I don't have a college degree. I took a couple of journalism classes, but like I've just kind of always written, and I've kind of formatted my own style doing that. I'm not, I'm sure like if I put it in front of a journalism professor, they would have a lot to say about the way I do things. But I've gotten to where I'm not bad, just kind of doing it on my own. Um, my thing is I don't want every story to look the same, so I try to find a unique angle on each one, and I want to tell a story. I know what I like to read, right? Like I'm a big hockey fan, so I read like the Athletic every morning to read their Stars coverage, and I know what I want to read when I go in there and start reading that. So I kind of keep that in my mind of, okay, if I write the same formulaic, I talked to recruit A here, he said this, then he said this, then he said this, end of story, like that stuff gets old, time after time. So I'm constantly brainstorming different ideas. And I think one thing that one thing that really helped me in that area was the pandemic. When the pandemic hit, we were terrified for our jobs because it's like, okay, there's no football going on. There's no, like, are they going to start cutting people? And I was just like, they ain't gonna cut me. I'm gonna write so many stories that they're not gonna
That's
have an
real talk.
opportunity to. Yeah. And so I would sit around all day and just think of like I would brainstorm different ideas. I've got a journal that I write stuff down all the time. I was just on vacation in Mexico and I took the journal with me, and I'd be sitting there by the pool and I'd think of an idea and just scribble it down in the journal real quick. Um, like the biggest thing is I've learned to be able to look at something big that happens in the college football world and say, how does that apply to Texas recruiting? And then put that spin on it. And a lot of that was learned through the pandemic, through no other source than like, hey, we've got to do this to survive. And so while the pandemic was obviously awful for a number of reasons, and it was it's got some long-term ramifications on the world, and a lot of people lost their jobs. I actually, there's part of it to me where I look at it and say I kind of learned who I was as a writer during that time, and I just try to make it as interesting as possible for the reader.
Let me ask you this, Mike. So a guy like Steve Wilfung and some of those guys that you would probably say at the top of the industry in 247. I don't know how often you've been around them, but what have you noticed about those guys? Is it just similar to you? They always show their face, or is it something that they kind of have that kind of allowed them to be, at the top of their profession? I frame it like that.
Those guys are machines. Like, as much as I work, and I think people who read my work would be like, man, Mike's always out working. I think Steve doubles and triples my output. Like, he is a machine. He is in. I was thinking about the other day, like, I've got a pretty good handle on the state of Texas. If I was just overseeing the state of Texas in general, I think I could do a pretty good job. Steve oversees the country and has like the scoop on everything. And I don't. I was starting to get overwhelmed for him on how much he must be having to deal with on a daily basis. A lot of those guys have just been around for a long time. They're great at establishing relationships. Um, I not only Steve, but a lot of guys on our national team, be it Brandon Huffman, who works in the Northwest. I think Brandon's one of the best. Like Brandon and Greg Biggins, who covers California for us. Those guys, if you're ever out on the West Coast, and I go out to Vegas every year for a 7-on-7 tournament, it's been time
Mhm.
with them. If you're ever out with them, it's like being with celebrities. I mean, it's like everybody knows them. Those guys have just been around so long. They're so good at what they do. They own that territory. There's nobody else that can even come close to them. And they just work. I mean, like I just kind of say, like, there is no secret to this business. It's just work. Like there's sometimes where it's a Sunday and maybe a guy like Flight in the Metroplex is having a training session, and I've worked all week and I don't want to go, and I'm tired and it's hot, but I go. And
Mhm.
usually I find when my body is telling me like I'm tired and I don't want to go, that's when you go, because push. And I think like a little microcosm of that was last year I was at coaching school. And a big thing of that for anybody listening who doesn't understand, that's the Texas High School Coaches Convention, and it's a big gathering of high school coaches, college coaches come and speak at it, and it's great for networking, for finding out news and all that sort of thing. And every day I would walk the floor from one hotel side to the other, just trying to talk to guys, meet new guys. And there was one day where I was just tired, and I was like, I don't want to do that again. And my brain was telling me, like, I'm tired, like you could skip it today. And I said, no, like when your brain tells you that, go ahead and push through it and do it. And I pushed through it and ended up like getting, I forget what it was, but some pretty big scoop just by walking to the other side of the room when my brain didn't tell me. And I think that's kind of the secret is go the extra step when other people aren't going to.
Who are some of the best players that you've covered in the last 3 or 4 or 5 years? And then when you go out to California or Las Vegas, is the athletes there different? Do they have a different, whether it be speedy, bigger, this, that, and the other, or is it very similar to the athletes we see down here in the state of Texas?
So I'll start with your first question. So if we want to say the last 4 or 5 years, that changes the answer a little bit. I mean, look, I covered Kyler Murray, and it's hard to imagine covering a better high school football player than Kyler Murray was. Like, Garrett Wilson was another one. Like, I'm pretty good on my track record on like wide receivers. I was really early in telling people that Garrett Wilson, Jalen Waddle, and Jackson Smith-Njigba were 3 of the freakiest wide receivers I'd ever seen in my life. And
what did you see in them, Mike?
So I remember Garrett. I'll start with Jalen. That year, I forget who else was in that class. I know Brendan Eagles was. Alvonte Woodard was in that class. There was a big discussion for like who's the top receiver in the state of Texas. And Jalen was kind of just seen as like this low 4-star, kind of mid 3-star kid, small kid, played private school, could run. And you would watch him do things in 7-on-7 where he would catch like a quick crossing route and nobody on the field. I mean, it's a touch football game and they couldn't touch him. He did some just the way he was able to change direction and accelerate and burst and things like that. And the game hadn't really shifted to that yet. It was still more of a big receiver dominated game, but I looked at him and I thought, there was something about him where on the field, he was just clearly the alpha. He was clearly the best player every time I saw him. And so that was him. I mean, Garrett Wilson again, he was in a class where there was a lot of discussion about, okay, who is the top receiver? And it was never Garrett. Nobody was ever talking about Garrett early on. And I just watched him at Lake Travis and I'm like, this guy, every ball that's in the air, he wins. He's not the fastest guy in the world, but he constantly beats people deep. Like he's just, again, I saw him play at a tournament, a really loaded 7-on-7 tournament. And it was his first time playing 7-on-7 that spring. I mean, he was just clearly the best player. He was smoking like 5-star corners and things like that. And so, like, to me, it's not hard. It's like, when one guy stands out above everybody else, that's kind of it. With Jackson Smith-Njigba, it took a little vision with him because he kind of blew up as a sophomore, and I saw him early in his sophomore year and thought, that's a really interesting looking kid. I think if he can put some more stuff together, if he can get a little more explosive, like he's going to be really scary in the next couple of years. And he was built like a running back and played in the slot. So you could throw him that over the middle stuff and he'd break a tackle or two and then he's off to the races. So those were 3 guys that I thought were phenomenal. I think I'm just sticking in the state of Texas here, but I can certainly go outside of it. I mean, I saw Bijan Robinson in high school and was immediately, just okay.
What's that about him? Just the big size. I know he's a big guy.
Yeah, the size and the balance more than anything. I think we see that on Saturdays now, but like the balance was incredible. He was. A lot of people that year were like, well, he plays private school ball in Tucson, Arizona. And my thing is, if you play that level of competition, it's fine as long as you dominate it. And you could not dominate it anymore. I saw him play in a game against what I learned was a pretty good Tucson school. And I mean, he was out of the game, out at running back in the first half because he had already scored like 4 touchdowns. And then they just decided to put him in the slot and just play him in the slot situationally. And like as soon as he came in, just goes right down the seam, catches a touchdown. Like there's some guys where they're 5 stars and you say they're rated 5 stars, and you look at them on the field, and you could just, okay, that's a 5-star. Like, I could see it. And I remember making the trip to Arizona that year, and that one weekend I saw him and Keely Ringo both in separate games, and thought, yes, both of those guys are 5-stars. They're just clearly NFL bodies, clearly NFL athleticism, production, all those sorts of things. And I'm trying to think anybody else. I mean, I've got a lot of favorites over the years for sure. Man, I saw like Amon-Ra St. Brown when he played at the All-American Bowl, when the USC receiver. He was awesome. Probably one of the best route runners I've ever seen in my life. I got to see I'm blanking on the name. I'll have to think about it. I got to see I got to see Mater Dei last year a lot. I saw Mater Dei play like 3 games last year, and they were obviously extremely impressive. And I think, like, to your question, there are athletes all over this nation. I mean, there's guys in California, who in Nevada and all those places, that are just as impressive as the athletes in Texas. I think the difference is the depth, right? And I think that's what we get into when we have these big national high school games where Bosco comes and plays a team, or Mater Dei comes and plays a team. It's like, nobody has ever said and I'm the biggest like Texas high school football defender in the world. So
yeah,
I get my feelings hurt when people start talking about them when Mater Dei wins one of those games or something. It's nobody's ever said that like the top level teams in these other states can't hang with Texas. The difference for me is, yeah, you're 1 through 10 in California, and you're 1 through 10 in Florida might be as good as Texas 1 through 10, but you're 11 through 50. I mean, those teams in Texas will pound those other teams in Texas. It's just a depth thing. To me, the 6A D1 bracket is the toughest. It's the toughest level of high school football in the country. Like, going through playing a 6A schedule and then going through the 6A bracket, I think is a war of attrition. And that's why I think it's really impressive for teams that win that 6A D1 title, and why I don't place a lot of stock into one-off games with these national teams.
But see, and then you brought up an interesting point, Mike. So he's talking like a Mater Dei or a Bosco. To me, and I don't know if this is fair, but it's the private school aspect of it, and I just wonder, now, if you're school in this area, you can get a guy that may play for you, he not be in your district. We all know that happens. But it's not on a national level. That has to play in it a little bit too, Mike, won't you say?
Absolutely. I mean, those schools can, like, literally, I mean, like, Mater Dei had a running back last year, Raleek Brown, who went to USC, was a top, like, 100 national player, a phenomenal player. I'll throw him in there. One of the best athletes I've ever seen. And I saw Raleek play a lot in between 7-on-7 and high school. And like Raleek told me, they come and pick me up in a van in Pasadena every day, and I drive an hour and a half to school. Like, it's different when you can do something like that versus, yeah, look, I'm not going to pretend that there's not guys in Texas playing at high schools that in districts they don't live in, but it's not as widespread, and it's not as open, and it's not as advertised as we could go out and get the best of the best, And I think it's great for those schools. I think it's really diluted what California was as a high school football state, because California used to always be mentioned right up there. It's California, Florida, Texas. And California is kind of falling off because all their power is concentrated in just a few schools. So their depth wise, they aren't that strong. Whereas, their power used to be in the city schools, and schools like Dominguez and the inner city and Long Beach Poly and things like that, where now it's, if you're not at Mater Dei or Bosco, or maybe, Bishop Alemany, Bishop Amat, one of those schools, you're probably not, probably can't hang really. And so to me, it's kind of, like I said, diluted it. There's kids playing at Bosco that I've seen like in 7-on-7 and thought, man, that kid's incredible. And I'll ask our West Coast guys like, hey, what's up with that kid? And they're like, he's the 3rd string safety at Bosco. And he won't move because he knows he can get recruited by playing 1 year at Bosco. And it's like, just think if those kids were playing in different schools all over the state and playing earlier, like how much better the product would be. No,
that's a very good point. Speaking of which, of course, you've seen Archie Manning, big 5-star, I think the one prospect in ever, if we will. And then you've seen the young man who out of Cali, the quarterback committed to Texas, I forgot his name. What did you see about those two guys? Yeah, Malik Murphy. What did you see about those two guys, Mike?
I mean, Arch is incredibly polished, as you would expect him to be, as the next generation of Manning. And I think I laugh because it's just every day I get the hey, would he be a 5 star if he wasn't a Manning question, and it's like it's just it's weirdly he's like the most hated recruit of all time, and I don't get it.
Yeah.
But I mean, a really good passer, great frame, obviously. A big part of the quarterback game is processing mentally, and I can't imagine growing up in a better family just being like able to talk ball with guys than like Peyton and Eli Manning and Archie Manning, and even his dad Cooper, who was a really good high school player as a tight end. And so I think he is like a really safe bet. I think he's got a high floor, but he does also have a high ceiling. He doesn't play with a great team around him, so sometimes he does struggle to put up big numbers. But he could have transferred anywhere and gone and been part of a super team. But that's his school. He plays at Manning Field at Isidore Newman High School. His uncle's numbers are up on the wall. He wears the same number. Like it's, I think it's a really cool tradition. And so, yeah, obviously, really polished, I think is what comes off best about him, but like extremely competitive and extremely smart when it comes to talking ball. When you talk to his high school coach, they say all the time about how he comes in and will sit down on Sundays and do the game plan with the head coach for that week's game. So I always thought that's
Wow.
really impressive. Malik Murphy.
Let me stop you, Mike. Let me stop you real quick. Well, and this is probably a tough question for you. Is there a difference between him and when Quinn Ewers came out?
I again, Quinn Ewers was a kid I was really early on. I saw him as an 8th grader. And as soon as I saw him throw, I told somebody next to me, swear to God, I said, that's the number 1 quarterback in the country, like for his class.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need to see any of the other ones. To me, he's the best pure thrower of the football I've ever seen. I
Wow.
mean, just the way the ball comes out of his hand, it's got some like late action, like it explodes. Whereas most guys' balls slow down as they get to the end, his ball explodes as it gets to its final part. He is just as natural as it came, and Arch is not that gifted from an arm talent perspective. I don't think anybody is, but I think he's probably the things that stand out to me. Quinn's a little more of a risk taker, a little more of a gunslinger, whereas Arch, I think, is going to make the smart play. He's going to check down if he needs to. I saw him play a game last year against maybe one of the worst high school teams in America, and they were just dropping 8 or 9 into coverage every play, and were just determined not to let him beat them deep. So he would every play just check it down, and he probably could have thrown it deep into double coverage and still had some success, but he was just taking what they were giving him the whole game. So I think that's probably the key difference between those two. Malik Murphy, who you asked me about, the kid I absolutely love. I mean, if you want to talk about ceiling is insane. I mean, can throw the ball through a brick wall if he wanted to. Just one of the biggest raw arm strength guys I've ever seen in my life. I think people got lazy with their critique of Malik, and it was people who weren't really familiar with him, people who hadn't seen him play, and people who didn't know what they were looking at. Because I think I'm trying to decide how I want to say this. I think sometimes that's racially motivated. Sometimes, you'll say something about a guy being bad mechanics, and it's just a catch-all for you really not knowing what you're looking at. But, he may be an inner city kid, and so you just say bad mechanics. Malik didn't have bad mechanics. Malik was a well-trained quarterback. Malik's problem was he didn't have a lot of live reps at the high school level. He had been injured his sophomore year when he was going to be called upon to play. His junior year, COVID hit in California, did not play a season. Then they played a shortened season in the spring. And then his senior year, we really saw his stats climb from, his completion percentage improved by 5 or 6 points. Everything kind of pushed up, which is what we expect for a guy who's starting to get more live experience. He was just behind when it came to having to see those live reps and being able to process it at a high level. But when you talk about raw arm power, there's nobody I've seen that could throw like the deep out and the deep comeback and all those things better. I mean, he could throw it through a brick wall, and I don't think accuracy is a huge problem. I think there's some things he can fine tune there, but more than anything, it was just kind of live bullets that he was missing.
I got another 2-parter for you. Now we hear every time, especially in NFL draft time, you hear the rankings don't matter. The 3-star, what matters, what don't. what's the difference, Mike, between, let's say, a low level 4-star and a 5-star? And then the second part of this is, what do you see about the dominant, or the 4 or 5, really I say 5-star defensive tackles and offensive linemen? What do you see that make those guys 5 stars?
Okay, so we grade our rankings based on the draft. And people always say, well, why do you do that? They're playing college football. Well, the only rubric we can hold ourselves to is the NFL draft. That is like the results that we can say, okay, we put it this way, they were drafted this way. That's it. Our ranking stuff ends the moment they're drafted. I don't care what they do in the NFL. It doesn't matter if they're good, bad, or indifferent in the NFL. Where they are drafted kind of to us is a grade on where we rank them. And the reason for that is like, how do you define college success, right? Like, if we rank a guy a 5-star and he's a 6th-round pick, but he made an All-American team or an All-Conference team, do you consider that successful? Because a lot of those All-American teams and things like that, they're politically they're subjective. They're people voting on them. That's not a way for us to codify. So when we look at guys, 5-stars are to us guys who are no doubt first-round talent. We have 32 of them, and that mirrors 32 first-round picks. We think that all those guys are potentially at their ceiling. The talent just says it. And a lot goes into it. It's a lot of analytical data we look at. It's not just, hey, we watched the film and this guy passed the eye test. It's, what are his verified measurements? Do we have a wingspan on him? What does a first-round pick look like at the defensive tackle position? We go back and study 3 or 4 drafts worth of knowledge and say, okay, this is what the average height was for those guys who were drafted in the first. This is what the average weight was. This is what their average wingspan was. On average, those guys played both ways in high school. On average, those guys probably threw shot put, and they threw at this numbers. I don't know exactly what the number for shot put is. I think it's probably like 48. This is the number that we're putting as the benchmark. Anything over that, we think is pretty good. And we kind of like boil it down that way. And it's not the best way to, I don't want to say it's not the best way. It's not 100% fail proof, but I think for us, when you're playing a game where you're going to have misses regardless, right? There's going to be guys we rank high that just bust regardless. That's probably the safest way to go about it, is to bet on the numbers and the trends and what's going on. Like a big trend going on right now that we've noticed over the past couple of years is linebackers have gone from being, 6'3", 240 to 6'1", 225. And, I think we read that of the top 3 rounds in the last 3 drafts, over 70% of those guys were under 240 pounds in college. And so it's like, okay, well, when we look at linebackers who are 240 in high school, we just don't see them as linebackers. It's those kind of things that go into it. I think that's one big part of it. When you ask, like, what's the difference between a 5 and a 4, is those 4-star players, and I'll really get into this rant on 3-star players because it gets thrown around a lot. Well, this guy was just a 3-star. It's like, we think a 3-star player is pretty good. There's always going to be more 3-star players than anything because the vast majority of guys are going to be 3-stars. The elite of the elite are 5, the next step down are 4, and then the majority of guys are going to be 3s. So if you look at, we have a rubric on the site that basically says what each rating means. And the 3-star, like a high 3-star, says we expect him to be a significant contributor at the college level, to be an all-conference level player, and to have significant NFL draft upside. Like, that sounds pretty good to me, right? If you're a football player. But kids see 3-stars and they think, well, that's bad. And, a number of things separate those. I think it's, size it's a size and speed game. So what is your size like and what is your speed like? We're a verified company. So if you tell me you run a 4.4, I need you to show me. I need you to show me a 10.6 on the track or something like that. That's what's big with us, is we like to look for verified athleticism. And so when you say, like, what's the difference between a mid to low 4 and a 5, well, maybe that mid to low 4 doesn't have the athletic markers that we're looking for, or maybe he has all the athletic markers and none of the production at the high school level. Maybe he's a freak athletically, but he caught 10 passes for 200 yards last season and 3 touchdowns. And we look at that and say, well, the production isn't there, but the athleticism is. And I think that those are kind of the big things. The 5 stars are the freaks. Those are the called dinosaurs, and you look, we bring every year at the All-American Bowl, they come in to check in and they're just one after another. You're just looking like this, like, oh my God. And you get an up close look at these kids and they're, 6'6", 6'7" when it comes to offensive line, and they've got an 85-inch wingspan and they got 11.5-inch hands, and they can do some freaky stuff. Like I watched Walter Nolan, who signed with A&M last year, who was a 300+ pound defensive tackle, win the short shuttle agility drill at the Under Armour camp against like DBs and receivers. That's freaky.
Wow.
That's like NFL level freaky. And so, it's big things like that. What we look for, again, O-line, D-line are guys who can move, guys who can who have big projectable frames. We love like a basketball background for those guys is a big plus. Track and field background, if they're throwing, is a big plus for us. And especially for D-line guys that play both ways. I think that it kind of translates.
39 minutes in, Mike, really, really good conversation. So, Mike, let me ask you this. Let's say you have a kind of another 2-parter, but let's say you have like a 5, I don't want to get too crazy, 5'11" linebacker, but he's and this might not ever happen, but he's a 4'3", 4'4" guy. Can that guy, even though he undersized as a height thing, can he still be ranked a 5-star, or will he get penalized for his height? And then how do you judge a guy like, let's say, a Deuce Vaughn at Kansas State, or Winfield Jr. that was at Minnesota? Undersized guys, but guys that you can see maybe make the NFL.
Yeah, I think we would probably, and look, our process is ever changing. It's ever evolving. We learn new things every year from what we did the last year. I think had Deuce Vaughn come out now, we'd have probably been, he had a lot of the athletic markers we looked for. I think that, for instance, I think you saw this with Kyler Murray. Until somebody breaks through that ceiling, we kind of get stuck on it. So like when I was growing up, there was never a way a guy who was as short as Kyler Murray would ever be looked at as a big time NFL quarterback. We just couldn't see it. And then Kyler Murray shattered the kind of the glass on that. Russell Wilson too. And so now that paves the way for kids that, okay, we look at and say, yeah, he's small, but he's got a lot of the same athletic markers as these guys who we've seen do it at the high level. That paves the way for them. I think that would have been the same for Deuce Vaughn. I think he was just kind of one of the first of his kind, and he'll pave the way for somebody else. Because, I mean, I thought he was a tremendous player in high school, and I always thought if he could go somewhere where they could figure out how to utilize his special traits, he would be fun to watch. I think when you look at linebacker, yeah, we look for the 6'1" to 6'2" range. But it all depends. It's all a sliding scale. I mean, if a guy's 5'11", but can carry the weight we look for and has the production and has the athletic markers and all those sorts of things, I think that all those things really show up. I pulled up Antoine Winfield here, Winfield Jr., and man, I watched. I'm a Bills fan, so the Bills drafted Antoine Winfield Sr. I was a big fan of his father. Yeah, there's no way. It looks he was class of 2016, so we probably weren't quite where we needed to be with the way we evaluated by that point. I think we've come around really way more in the last couple of years. But for a kid who was 5'10", 197, had a verified 4.35 40, a verified 4.16 shuttle, and a 33-inch vert, he would have been much higher in today's world. It's again, it's a learning process, and we've learned a lot more through that process, probably by undervaluing guys like Antoine Winfield. We'd say, okay, I think a lot of people have a lot of things to say about our rankings, but we are probably our harshest critics where we say, okay, where did we miss there? What did we not get there, and how could we fix that next time to where we don't have this issue? And looking at his stuff, yeah, he would have been. I mean, I could have seen him being an easy like 90, 91 grade, which puts you solidly as a 4-star prospect.
What do you so running back? You kind of hit on it with Bijan, but what do you look for in a running back, Mike? Is it good feet? Is it power? Like what's the nuance that you kind of look for when you judge a back?
Size, verified speed, for sure. Those are the first two things. And then yards per carry. Yards per carry is a big marker for us because I think total yards can be kind of deceiving because if you put up a lot of total yards, but it takes you a ton of carries to do it, that's different. I mean, now Bijan was – I think Bijan during his senior year at one point was averaging like 23 yards per carry, which is just an insane number. And I think for us, if you're over like 5.5 yards per carry, we're pretty happy with that.
Mm-hmm. I think Mike lost his connection. Talking to Mike Roach 247 Horns, really one of the best guys in the business at this. Just talking recruits, talking, what makes a 4-star, what makes a 5-star recruit. And I'm going to see if I can tell Brother Mike, I think he lost his connection. So, yeah, we'll get Mike back on here. Just talking ball. And I think Mike is back on here. Let's see. I think you lost the connection, Mike.
Yeah, my bad.
Okay,
don't know what happened. I guess my internet dropped. Okay. We're talking about running backs.
Yep.
I don't want to speak totally for our guys, but I think 5.5, 6 yards per carry is probably what we look for as a marker there. And then it's just like the little things. It's balance, it's power, it's, can he vision? I think vision's a big one that a lot of people miss. There are a lot of guys who I've seen who are ultra athletic running backs that just can't see the hole. They can't see the cutback lane. They can't see it. And so I've covered a couple of them where those guys were highly ranked, and I'm banging the table yelling at our national guys that, hey, this guy, I watched him jump cut directly into a hole where there was a linebacker standing. So I just don't think he sees it as well. And if he doesn't see it, does the athleticism matter as much? Where you see a guy like Deuce Vaughn, who certainly has all the athleticism, but he also he sees the game where it's going and is able to make those moves and get into those little cuts and running lanes and be able to make a play. So that's kind of what I look for personally in a running back. I think everybody's a little different with what they prefer.
How easy, Mike, is it to? And I'm thinking of a young man right now because we're in the Dallas area, DeCurry and Moore, and there's a few other ones. How is it? Is it easy to identify those young guys that just have it, and they could be 9th grade? Maybe have voice experience, maybe not. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful because a lot of times guys that pop early, they max out early too. They stop growing earlier than others. But like there are just some that's like, and DeCorian's absolutely one of them. It's like, yeah, that guy is. We start having the conversation like, is he the best receiver in the state of Texas, regardless of class? I don't know that I could say that for sure. But I think I could make an argument for it. He's a special talent. And sometimes I think those guys that are, when they pop out young, it's super easy to see because you watch them at such a young age doing such nuanced stuff. The trick is with them to watch between their like sophomore and junior year and see if they're still getting better. That's like the big trick because, there's been a lot of guys that come to mind that popped up as freshmen. And we were like, wow, this kid is amazing. And then they just kind of never got better from there. And so those are the big markers. But yeah, DeCorian in particular is he's in a class I think that's going to be pretty loaded at the wide receiver position in 2025. I'm just telling everybody, like, look, I've seen all of them. They're all really good, but like DeCorian is the one. He is him, as the kids like to say.
I think that's a good point because I was talking to Coach Spencer, linebacker coach out of Sock, and he was saying, I was asking about Riggins. Because physically he has it, but he was saying how a guy like that has to understand the mental side of the game to take it next level because he's been big for so long that at this level you can't do that. You got to have that technique. So
Yeah,
Plenty of
it
time to
does.
get to that point.
At that point, it doesn't matter. Like, and the kids that are big early, it's funny because the kids on defense who are like big early, they never have to play with technique because they can fly to the ball, they can hit, all those sorts of things. The kids on offense, like the offensive line, who are so big early on, we find it funny because most of them are just sweethearts of kids. They're gentle giants,
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
we think a big reason for that is when you're that big as a kid. Like, okay, so say you're
Mhm.
Andre Kojo, who at 16 years old is 6'6", 330 pounds. Well, that means he was probably a pretty big 8-year-old,
Yep.
and I'm sure his whole life he's been told, go easy on those kids. They're not as big as you. They can't take it. Be nice to
Mhm.
them. Don't bully them. And
Mhm.
then you get him to high school and his coaches are like, I want you to drive that kid into the ground. And he's like, but I've been told my whole life to be nice to those kids and
Yeah.
to go easy on them. And so it's almost like you got to find kind of the dog in them because it's been coached out of them for so long that now you got to get it back in you. Whereas, I mean, some guys got it. DJ Campbell in last year's class was just I
I
mean,
was gonna hit on him. Yeah.
a,
What you see him? I was gonna hit on him.
a super kid, really nice, really, respectful kid. But like when he put the helmet on, he was just like, give me the number. I was joking with somebody the other day. I was talking about, we were talking about Kojo actually and how good he is. Talking about scheme, he was talking to us about kind of, well, Coach Flood wants to block it like this. We block it like this at our high school, and we call it this or that. And he's going through it with us, and we're like, wow, Andre's really got a great handle on scheme. And I said, yeah, I said he'll be, breaking it down. And I said a lot of those guys do. Him, Cole Hudson, a lot of those guys they signed in last year's class have that kind of brain for it. And I said, and meanwhile, Devon's just going to be sitting in the corner taping his knuckles, like, just give me the number of who you'd like me to kill, and I'll kill them. And
Yeah.
that's basically Devon. Anytime he steps on the field, he's just ready for a fist fight. My favorite moment was last year at the Under Armour All-American game during practice week. Devon gets there. He's lined up against like some big time guys, and they're just doing walkthroughs. It's just walkthrough, no pads, no helmet. And one of the kids like kind of gives him a jab in the face during the walkthrough and busts his nose open. And
Mm.
Devon and I was like, uh-oh. And I was the only person I saw it, and I was just like, uh-oh. And everybody was like, what? And I'm like, this is gonna be bad for that kid. And Devon just kind of looked at him and goes, that's all right. We got one-on-ones coming up. And the kid was like, huh? What'd you say? And he's like, I said, we got one-on-ones coming up. We'll be good. We'll clarify this there. And I was just like, oh boy. And he made it kind of his personal mission to ruin that kid's life during one-on-one. So
Wow.
just like a kid who never had to have the aggression coached into him. He's a one of a kind when it comes to that.
So, Mike, with those guys, D line, O line, do you pay a lot of attention to their ability to lift weights, how much weight they can lift as far as strength?
Yeah, a little bit. Functional strength certainly does matter, but I also believe that like if you have the frame to carry it, I would much rather a college strength and conditioning coach put that weight and strength on them than a high school or them just doing it on their own. So I think for us, like flexibility and movement is a bigger indicator than just raw strength. Now, like a lot of those guys, they have all three. They can put them all together. That's what DJ was. He was a guy that could lift anything. I think he set a couple records in the buoy weight room. He was able to move on the football field, and then you would watch him play basketball at 6'2", and he could just turn around and punch it off of one leg. And he kind of combined them all, and that's what makes a special prospect like that. But no, I think for me, movement and flexibility is a lot more important than strength at the high school level.
Okay, Mike, let's pivot. I'm gonna wrap it up in shortly because we're about an hour in. Let's pivot to your book. I seen that you wrote a book. I think that's pretty dope. Give a little details with that and how did that come about?
Yeah, I really I got approached to write this book. It's called The Road to Texas. It is about how several of the great players at Texas ended up there and how their recruitments unfolded. And I didn't really know what I was getting into when I agreed to it. I just thought, man, it'd be cool to say I wrote a book, right? And I'll give you a little teaser. I'm thinking about writing another, but I'm at least threatening people that I will write another. So
Go for it.
I got through it and was like, that was pretty excruciating, especially because I had deadlines coming up right after signing day. And there was, I would work all day at 24/7. And then at night I would be up all night writing the book. And it was some long nights and really like stressful days and things like that. But it really came out cool. And I got to sit down with a lot of, Texas football greats and really talk to them. I mean, we talked to Derek Johnson was probably the big one for me that was like cool for me, because watching Derek Johnson when I was a kid.
Well, he was special. Yeah.
I mean, special. And I guess I shouldn't say kid. I think he graduated 01. I graduated 03. So like I was in high school when he was kind of making his way into college. But being able to sit down with him, BJ Johnson, who to me, when BJ Johnson came to Texas, he came with Roy Williams, and everybody was like, they got Roy Williams. And I was like, no, they got BJ Johnson, because I was a South Irving kid. He played at South Grand Prairie. And so like, he was like a mythical figure to us in DFW, especially, if you're not familiar with the geography. Grand Prairie and Irving bump right up against each other. So he was just a kid playing 5 miles down the road, and you would hear, well, BJ Johnson had like 400 yards receiving last night and things like that.
Wow.
So getting to
and
sit
that's
down.
A name that's forgotten a little bit, Mike. That's a name that, unless you're a Texas fan or you're a local guy, you don't always hear that name anymore. But he was a baller.
It was the first name I put on the list when we wrote it down. Just, it was a personal thing for me. I was like, I just want to talk to BJ Johnson because he was like I said, he was a mythical figure to us in high school. Mm-hmm. Got to sit down with him for a long time, went to his office and we sat for 2 hours and talked and had a great time. Michael Huff's in the book. Aaron Williams is in the book. Roy Miller, Rod Wright, a lot of guys. And look, at first it was hard. It was hard tracking these guys down and getting them to agree to do it. But I think once we kind of started getting it rolling, BJ was really instrumental in it. I remember he was calling guys for me saying, hey, you need to do this guy's book. He's doing it. He ain't gonna do you wrong. Like, he's doing a good thing. I'm trying to think who else. Blake Brockermeyer is in the book. Quan Cosby, Fozzie Whitaker. So, and then I do have a chapter on Bijan Robinson. That was something that our publisher was very interested in. Obviously, with Bijan at Texas, I didn't have direct access to talk to him, but I covered his recruitment. I had millions of quotes from him from his recruitment that we could tell the story. And I brought in our friend Blair Angulo, who is our regional analyst at 24/7 and covered Bijan in Arizona. And he kind of tells the story of Bijan in that chapter. So it's a lot of funny stories. I mean, I think the cool thing for me was like a lot of those guys were early Mac Brown era guys. And a lot of them, we talked to them, would say, I wanted to go to Florida State, because when we grew up in that era, Florida State was it, and Mac really changed my mind this way or that way. And, Roy Miller's got a really interesting story, being at once an Oklahoma commit and then flipping to Texas. I thought Derek Johnson had a really interesting story, being a Wake kid. His brother played at Baylor, but with Baylor struggling, really was drawn to Texas and to bringing, the greatness back to Texas. And I mean, obviously did everything he could. I think Michael Huff, again, an Irving guy. So really that connection was big for me. And I remember trying to get Huff, texted him. I'm going, hey, BJ Johnson did it. He's a South Prairie guy. I'm an Irving guy too. I grew up there. Like, my best friend's dad coached Michael Huff in high school. I'm like, I need you to do it. And finally, Huff was just like, dude, I was like 2-star recruit who nobody cared about. Like, why do you want to tell that story? And I was like, that's the most interesting story. You were a little 2-star recruit nobody cared about, and you turned into a Thorpe Award winner and top 10 draft pick. Like, how did everybody miss on this? That's an interesting story. Like, I could have done the Sam Ehlinger story, but I didn't want to do grew up his whole life wanting to play for Texas and then played for Texas. I wanted to get into the, what was it really about Texas that swayed you? Where were you going to go other than that? And so I think there's a lot of cool stories in the book. I'm hoping the one disappointment I have is like, I didn't get any of the, what I would probably call the Mount Rushmore of Texas football. I didn't get Colt, Vince, Ricky, or Earl. And, was on Earl and through, and he sent me a very polite decline, and so I can't hate on him for that. Colt was pretty tough to get in touch with. Ricky was, as you would imagine, pretty tough to get in touch with. And then Vince, I thought there were a couple times I was going to be able to get Vince, but just couldn't get through his layer of people to do it. So
and that comes with it, Mike. Maybe they'd be on the second, but that comes with it because some of those guys, they're good, but a part of them being so good is it's tough to reach them. Where can people find the book, Mike?
So it released in October, but pre-orders are going on now. You can find it on triumphbooks.com. It's called The Road to Texas, or you can find it on Amazon for pre-orders as well. And there's been a really good response so far, and I think it's been overwhelming to me because I told my wife, I was like, my biggest fear is that this thing flops and like nobody buys it, and I just, I spent a year of my life doing something that ultimately doesn't matter, and man, the response early on has been so good from our like Horns 24/7 readers and some people on Twitter. Man, shout out to Charles Daniels on Twitter who I've known Charles for a couple of years, and there's no bigger supporter of my work than Charles. So he's been pumping it every day. I feel like I owe him a cut of the book now when it comes in. But it's been really cool to see. I'm looking at it, not too far ahead of myself, but I'm like, could I get on the New York Times best? And I almost want to make a tweet, and I might make this tweet. So if it comes out later, don't be surprised of like, hey, I want to go to my high school reunion in 2023 and tell everybody I'm a New York Times bestseller. So please pre-order my book. And then I can't get into what I think I might do for the next one yet, because I don't want anybody to totally take the idea. But let's just say I think you would really be interested in it. I think it's going to be an examination of inner city football in Dallas, high school. And excited about the potential of it. Like it was something, this book was an idea. So while I enjoyed doing it and I think it's fun to write a book, there were parts of it where I was like, well, this wasn't my idea. It didn't match up in my brain. I'm just doing somebody else's idea. Whereas this next one's kind of my idea. And I started threatening to write it. And then I started talking to some people about possibilities about it. And I thought, I could do this. So I think in the next months, I'll figure out if I'm really going to take off with it or not. But I've talked to a lot of coaches in South Dallas and in the inner city and want something from that angle. So I think that could be a really cool story as well.
Good stuff. About an hour, we ain't going to get it to wrap it up. Your internet is a little choppy, Mike. I don't know if you connect to the Wi-Fi or not, but let's end with these two, Mike. Give me your thoughts on this NIL stuff. It's taking this college football world by storm, and then give me your ideas where this alignment stuff is going to go, and then we'll end on those two.
Yeah, the NIL. So I apologize with internet. It gets spotty in my office sometimes. It's I got to close the door. There's a couple walls between my router, and so usually I'm hardwired in, but I had to take my hardwiring off for something.
Okay.
The NIL stuff is, I think for me, it's something I've wanted to see for a long time, just because these kids are profited off of by adults. They deserve to make money, right? Like everybody's a capitalist in this country until it ruins their their. So if you're into capitalism, these kids should be able to make money off of
it. Say that again, Mike, because it cut out. Say that again.
I'm just saying everybody's a capitalist in this country until it ruins their interests. So, like, if you're a capitalist, you should want these kids to be able to pay what the market bears for their services, and their endorsements and things like that. So I've wanted it for a long time. Predictably, like the NCAA had no plan on how to roll it out. So it's been a kind of I was going to say a cuss word there. It's been kind of a clown show for a while. So, man, I don't know. It's one of those things where it's like, I think they released it, a lot of restrictions on it, and then tried to trim those restrictions back. It would have been better than releasing it with no restrictions, and now all of a sudden started to put a lot of restrictions on it. So I'm not sure to play out. The realignment is what it is. I know people aren't happy. They want their regional college football, and I get that. I totally do, but this is where the sport's going, and it's kind of an adapt or die type of thing. And if you don't get on with one of these super conferences, you're going to be left in the cold. It's a money-making business, and these schools are doing what's best for themselves and making money. It's not necessarily great for the game, but it is great for their bottom line, which is kind of what this country and what sports in general has become.
Mike, let's end with this one. Do you see any of it, whether NIL, whether realignment, do you see any of that somehow trickling to the high school game?
Man, I think they're going to try to keep it out as long as they can. But yeah, I think eventually it would. And that's where I think it's going to really get out there because, you're going to have kids who are, driving Hellcats and stuff, and their high school coaches aren't going to be able to tell them what to do. And I think that's where I think the negative consequence of that is going to drive a lot of good people out of the coaching business and things like that. So I hope if they do unroll it, They need to, because it's not like I don't feel the same way at the high school level, because there's not people making a ton of money off of high school players like they are off of college players, And so I feel like if it gets there, I hope they've got a good plan for it.
Okay, that'll work. Out 3 minutes in. Mike Roach 247 Horns 247. Mike, appreciate it, man. Enjoy your time coming on. I'll probably post a little snippet of this in probably in a little bit. And enjoy your day, brother.
We've been trying to do this for a long time, so I'm glad we could connect and get it done. I appreciate you for having me on, man.
Okay,
right.
Take care, Doc. All right.
Bye.